Editing Megan here. This video contains mentions of self-harm, ideation, and unaliving oneself. If these are sensitive topics for you, then please go ahead and skip this one, and I will catch up with you in the next one. Hello, YouTube. I am not wearing any makeup in this video. I did not bother changing into an interesting shirt. I am literally just a blob, but I did manage to sit in a chair, so that's good. Today I'm going to be talking about autistic burnout. As you can see, I am clearly burned out and have been for a while, which is why I will be talking about it today. This video is gonna probably be mostly in my monotone because I can't pretend to be neurotypical right now. So yeah, you're just gonna get my full-on autistic monotone today, which is appropriate for a video about burnout because burnout is a really big topic and it's a big part of the autistic community, and unfortunately, and I know I'm not the only one experiencing it right now, especially, so that's why I wanted to cover this in a video and just give you an idea of what burnout actually looks like. So autistic burnout, as I said, has been part of the autistic community for a long time, as long as autism has existed, so basically forever. But it's only recently begun to attract attention from scientists and doctors. Every autistic person will experience this at some point, and it's very different from regular burnout or career burnout. And even though scientists and researchers are starting to pay more attention to the voices of autistic people, autistic burnout is still very much underexplored, which makes it difficult to treat. In 2020, Dr. Dora Raymaker and her team conducted a landmark study on autistic burnout, which was the first of its kind. And their groundbreaking work gave us the best and most comprehensive definition of autistic burnout that we've ever had. So autistic burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic life stress and a mismatch of expectations and abilities without adequate supports. It is characterized by pervasive long-term, so typically 3+ months, exhaustion, loss of function, and reduced tolerance to stimulus. Dr. Megan Anna Neff, who wrote Self-Care for Autistic People and the Autistic Burnout Workbook, narrowed down this definition even more, describing autistic burnout as a thing that happens when there's chronic life stress coupled with a mismatch between life's expectations and an autistic person's abilities without adequate supports. It can feel like a rising tide of demands that accumulate over time, and no matter how much you try or how hard you work, you just can't meet those demands. And if you don't have the proper supports in place, you'll just burn out and then not be able to do anything. In the Burnout Workbook, which is an amazing book, by the way, 10 out of 10 recommend, Dr. Megan Anna Neff asked a community of autistic people to explore what burnout meant for them and felt like to them through metaphor. And these were some of the responses. So autistic burnout feels like barely keeping your own head above water while everyone else is having fun on jet skis above you. It's like running out of gas in the middle of a busy road and having to push your car home by yourself. I feel like I'm driving with my empty gas tank light on and have no idea if I'm going to make it to the next gas station in time. I have an extreme feeling of being untethered, floating, disoriented in all senses. Autistic burnout feels like all available energy goes into just barely surviving while everyone else is just living life. So for me, autistic burnout feels like being at a loud, rambunctious dinner table where people keep shoveling food onto my plate and demanding that I eat it, and I'm not allowed to refuse, even though I'm stuffed and about to throw up if I eat another bite. It feels like someone turned up the volume and increased the saturation on the whole world while I feel more and more like I don't even exist. It feels like standing in midair with no solid ground under my feet and being forced to keep walking forward, even though I know if I take one single step, I'll fall to my death. It feels like being in the middle of a tornado, and every time I try to stand up, I'm knocked flat again. It feels like I can't focus on anything for more than a couple of minutes at a time, and I struggle to do just the bare minimum. Autistic burnout versus depression. Autistic burnout is very different from depression, even though they might look the same on the outside. Burnout can lead to depression for sure, but typically the initial causes and symptoms and the internal experiences of each are very different, and they each require a different treatment approach. That's why it's so important for doctors and psychologists and therapists to understand the difference between depression and autistic burnout. Prescribing antidepressants won't help with autistic burnout unless the autistic person also has depression, and the behavioral treatment for depression can actually make autistic burnout worse. Treatment for depression typically centers around increasing activity in the person's life so that they can gradually start interacting with the world again. For example, exercise and increased social activity are typically suggested to people who are experiencing depression, but those things can actually make autistic burnout worse because burnout happens in the first place when there's too much activity and not enough time to rest and recover. Every autistic person has to ultimately find their own way out of burnout depending on what works best for them. But similarly to depression, recovery often does involve an increase in meaningful activities, including spending time with close friends and loved ones. The difference is that with burnout, these activities need to be balanced out by lots of rest time in a low sensory environment and should only be taken on after a period of rest and low demands. Burnout signs and symptoms. Symptoms of burnout tend to organize themselves into three main clusters. So exhaustion, which includes pervasive physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion, feeling drained, run down, feeling like you need to sleep more, difficulty managing emotions, difficulty accessing empathy, emotional numbness, or more crying than usual, or both, feeling more irritable, brain fog, loss of ability to focus on tasks, and memory problems. And then there's heightened sensory sensitivities, which include things like sounds and smells are louder and more intense and can trigger irritation or even rage, finding it harder to tolerate physical touch, more easily overwhelmed by bright lights or busy environments, can't stand clutter because it's too much visual overwhelm, more frequent sensory meltdowns and shutdowns, needing more time to mentally prepare for transitions, sticking to routines more than usual, loss of tolerance for any kind of change, no matter how small. Then there's loss of skills, so tasks that were once manageable now seem overwhelming, difficulty starting tasks or switching between tasks, decreased ability to problem solve or make decisions, taking longer to respond to messages, talking to people feels like too much effort, less capacity to socialize, diminished capacity for small talk, struggles with personal hygiene, finding it harder to maintain living space, challenges with maintaining daily routines. So not everyone will experience all of these symptoms, of course, but these are just some of the most common signs and symptoms that burnout is happening. Because we can struggle with interoception, it's not uncommon for autistic people to not even know that we're in a state of burnout until it gets so bad that we lose the ability to function altogether. This is often when adults end up getting diagnosed when their burnout gets so bad that it affects their ability to show up for their lives at all. So more on that later. But here's how some autistic people described the feeling of burnout in their own words. When I'm not in burnout, I can sit in a coffee shop and see beauty in the people around me interacting, enjoying one another, connecting. In burnout, I look at them and am abhorred. I don't have tolerance for humanity. I daydream more about escape, having no demands, etc. During autistic burnout, I experience regular suicidal ideation that is totally unlike my past experiences with depression. I'm operating so far beyond my actual capacity that I just can't fathom the thought of pushing my brain and body to do one more thing. My creativity goes away. I stop making art and putting thought into my appearance. Projects I was so excited about now feel like mountains. I can't do small daily things that felt simple before. I feel behind on everything and have no desire to catch up. My special interests stop providing me comfort and I start pulling away from people and isolating. So all of these examples came from the Autism Burnout Workbook by Dr. Megan Anna Neff, which I'm going to be referencing a lot in this video. I'm doing the workbook right now and I can't recommend it highly enough. This is my first experience of autistic burnout since I was diagnosed. And if you're in the same boat, first of all, I'm sorry, that sucks so much. I see you and I'm here with you. And second of all, I want to share with you some things that I've realized and I'm still realizing about autistic burnout, things that maybe you are also learning or will also learn. All of a sudden, you're going to feel very autistic and you won't be able to mask anymore. So one of the weirdest things about burnout is that when we're in it, we feel more autistic. Smells are stronger, lights are brighter, sounds are louder, and our routines become crucial lifelines that anchor us to existence and ensure that we literally survive. When they get disrupted, even in a small way, our nervous systems can go into DEFCON 1 and it can literally feel like we're about to die. We may feel an extreme need to isolate ourselves and not interact with anyone, and meltdowns and shutdowns become more frequent. The reason that burnout makes our autistic traits louder is because when we're in it, we no longer have the energy to mask, not even to ourselves. If you're a high masking autistic person, there are likely aspects of yourself and how you show up that you don't even realize are a mask until you can't do it anymore. A few weeks ago, I had a particularly bad meltdown because of cumulative life stress and too many changes to my routine in one day. It was so bad that I couldn't even look directly at my partner, and I realized that my ability to look at people's faces is completely contrived. It's not something I do naturally at all, and I didn't realize it until I could no longer do it. I explained it to my partner using the analogy of potty training. Humans don't naturally use a toilet. It's something that we have to be taught how to do when we're toddlers. By the time we're adults, we've trained ourselves to use a toilet automatically without a lot of conscious thought, and it wouldn't even cross our minds not to unless it was very urgent and there were no bathrooms available. This is kind of what masking can be like for an autistic person. Some of it is conscious, but a lot of it is automatic, and we don't even know it's a learned behavior until we can't do it anymore. So much of our masking is unconscious, and for me, looking at faces is one of those things. My brain isn't wired to pay attention to people's faces or to even register them as something interesting to look at. I taught myself how to do that very early on because I must have picked up on or been told somewhere along the line that it's expected of me to look at someone's face when I'm talking to them, even though it's not something I naturally do or even can do comfortably. We're taught to mask our autistic traits from childhood, which reinforces the message that the way we naturally exist and move through the world isn't acceptable. This is one way we develop internalized ableism, by learning that we need to suppress our natural selves to make accommodations for the needs and social norms of non-autistic people. More on that later. So we develop a mask, if we can, to help us fit in better and to help allistic people be more comfortable around us. And eventually, aspects of that mask become indistinguishable from who we really are. I recently joined a support group for autistic adults and went to my first meeting a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely no one was masking at all in any way, which made it so much easier both to be there and to notice which aspects of me as a human are a mask and which are actually the real me. We were all coloring during the meeting, and I found myself feeling compelled to look over the shoulders of people next to me and make pretty little compliments about their artistry, and then feeling extreme exhaustion and aversion at just the thought of doing that. And then I realized I was feeling compelled to make small talk even though I really didn't want to, and that was my mask leaping into action, trying to protect me. I ignored the compulsion and then felt immediate relief and so much comfort at the thought that I didn't have to perform neurotypical person TM in that moment, and that I could just relax and be my full autistic self. We all ended up getting into a lively and passionate conversation about neurodiversity and gender, during which no one looked at anyone else. At exactly the end of the session, and not a second afterwards, the facilitator announced that it was time to go, and we all stood up and immediately left without doing that drawn-out talky talk thing that people are expected to do at the end of a social gathering. It was one of the most enjoyable, most freeing, and genuinely affirming social interactions I've ever had, and it drove home just how much of my social self actually is a mask. When we experience burnout and no longer have the energy to maintain that mask, it becomes very clear what's contrived and what's real. And that's essentially why we end up feeling more autistic. We can no longer dissociate from ourselves or pretend to fit in with neurotypical society. Masking takes up a lot of energy, and masking too much or too often without breaks in between to allow ourselves to just be is a major contributing factor to burnout. Even when your mask is largely unconscious or automatic, it still eats up a ton of brain power to maintain, and eventually that becomes unsustainable. When coupled with an accumulation of life stressors, too much change, and not enough support, asking ourselves to maintain our tightly controlled neurotypical masks just becomes too much, so we drop them, and then all of our autistic traits come out in full force, sometimes surprising even ourselves. When I burn out, one of the first aspects of my mask to go is my ability to be flexible in any way, shape, or form. If I'm doing really well, generally speaking, I can at least pretend to be okay with changes to my routine or things being put back in a place they don't belong or last minute changes of plans. But when I'm experiencing autistic burnout, even the tiniest changes send me into an epic meltdown that I have zero control over. It's like my body is just doing things all by itself, and I can only stand by helplessly as the sobs come and my heart races and my hands shake. It feels like I have very little control, if any, over myself and my reactions, and when the meltdown stops, I feel very, very embarrassed. The sheer number of meltdowns I've had since last October felt very familiar, and they made me see my childhood tantrums and chronic school refusal in a new light. I realized that I wasn't bad or wrong or too dramatic or too sensitive. I was just autistic, and I was almost always overwhelmed. You'll realize you've been here before, many times. When it finally dawned on me that what I've been experiencing over the past year is autistic... When it finally dawned on me that what I've been experiencing over the past year is autistic burnout, the first thing I realized is that this feeling isn't new. In fact, looking back on my life, I can now see that most of it has been spent in a state of perpetual burnout, interspersed by a few brief periods where everything was actually good for a while. Looking back on my life, I can point to specific periods of time where everything seemed particularly heavy, scary, uncertain, and draining. Between the ages of 6 and 9, right after my family moved us out of the big city and into the suburbs, and then my big sister, who was one of my core attachment figures, moved across the country. Between the ages of 13 and 17, when I was going through puberty and navigating the hellscape that was high school. Between the ages of 19 and 21, when I moved back to the city for university. Between the ages of 26 and 29, just after I left my first marriage, which had been toxic and abusive, then moved back home for a bit, then back to the city again with my best friend at the time, and then our friendship blew up. That one was particularly rough because it also involved losing 3 jobs in a row due to a loss of executive functioning skills and the ability to focus on anything at all. And now this past year again, between the ages of 35 and 36, when I figured out I was queer, broke up with my long-term boyfriend, moved in with my partner, got married, lost my dog, lost 2 family members, almost lost a third, dealt with a very significant job transition, and got diagnosed finally. The pattern that emerges is that all of these periods of burnout cluster around significant changes and life transitions. Moving, changing schools, puberty, transition to living on my own, marriage, divorce, job losses and transitions, and death. I lacked the proper support to help me navigate these changes because I didn't even know that I needed specialized support, much less how to ask for it or where to go to find it. Autistic burnout tends to occur during major life changes and transitions, even when those changes are positive or self-chosen. Looking back on all the times in my life I've burned out before, I can see clearly now that almost every episode of burnout was a result of too much change too quickly without anyone to help me adapt. Since that chaotic time last year when everything suddenly changed, I've realized that I need a lot of co-regulation and support around changes and transitions until I can establish and solidify new routines that will then allow me to self-soothe. Many autistic people, myself included, rely on our routines to create a sense of predictability in a world that feels alien and chaotic. When life happens and those routines have to change, it can be extremely destabilizing and create this scary feeling of losing control or of floating up into the air and being blown about by random winds with no sense of where you're going to land or if you'll ever get your feet back on solid ground again. While this feeling might be exhilarating for some people, if you're autistic, it's probably more terrifying than exciting. And being terrified all the time is exhausting. Navigating a world that seems hostile to your brain and body is exhausting. Having to push yourself beyond your limits each and every day just to be able to do the bare minimum is exhausting. Eventually, you will burn out. And when you do, you'll realize it gets worse each time. One thing I've noticed is that each successive period of burnout has been worse than the last. And by worse, I mean each time I've gone through burnout, I've experienced increasingly more severe symptoms. When I was a kid, I would have meltdowns a lot, refuse to go to school, have meltdowns on the school bus on the way to school, have severe dissociative episodes at school and at night lying in bed that made me feel like I wasn't real while the world around me suddenly got hyper real. I would very often feel tired, unmotivated, and socializing felt like a chore. I hated going to birthday parties and extracurricular activities, and I'd have recurring dreams about turning on the light in my bedroom, but then no light comes on, which was my brain telling me I had no energy left, and about trying to stand up and walk, but my legs kept buckling under me and I couldn't take another step. When I was younger, those episodes tended to be short-lived, and aside from the lack of focus and motivation, I never really experienced any genuine skills loss. This past year, though, has by far been the worst period of burnout I've ever had, probably because now I'm actually aware of what's going on and why. I've been pretty much non-functional at times, losing the ability to speak or answer messages, having more meltdowns, shutdowns, urges to self-harm, and episodes of passive suicidal ideation. This is one of the ways in which autistic burnout differs from depression. With depression, the desire to unalive oneself might be active and accompanied by a plan. There may be daydreams and fantasies about it and an idea of how to do it. With autistic burnout, there isn't necessarily a plan unless it progresses to depression, or really an active desire to unalive oneself. It's more just a thought that if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning, that would be okay. And there's a deep sense of comfort and relief in that. And it's not because of a desire to not be here anymore. It's because of a desire for all the demands to just stop and for everything to just be the same for as long as possible. And if I go to sleep and never wake up, it means that nothing will ever have to change ever again. Depression involves helplessness and hopelessness, a sense that the situation will never change, so what's the point? Autistic burnout involves overwhelm and desperation and a deep desire for the situation to actually stop changing so that our nervous systems can have a chance to complete the stress cycle and catch up to what's going on. More on that later. While autistic burnout is different from depression, it can coexist with depression, anxiety, and other conditions. It can also lead to depression eventually. If we're undiagnosed or unaware that autism is present, episodes of autistic burnout tend to get worse as we get older and the demands of life increase, while life changes and transitions start happening at a more rapid pace. If we don't know that we need support and accommodations, much less what kinds of support and accommodations, we won't be able to keep up with these demands and will struggle harder and harder to keep our heads above water until one day it just all gets to be too much and we drown. It's at this point that late diagnosed adults often finally go in for assessments. It's when I got diagnosed at the beginning of this latest episode of Burnout, and it's what led me to ultimately realize how my autistic nervous system has been pushing itself far beyond its limits for my entire life, and I just can't do it anymore. You'll realize you have to grieve the limits of your autistic body. Many of us have a complicated relationship with the word disabled, but for me, it was freeing. It helped me recognize and understand that I'm not struggling because I'm broken or bad. I'm struggling because I live in a society that wasn't built for my brain and body, and that disables me. All my life, I've been attempting to keep up with the people who do have brains and bodies that mesh with our society, beating myself up when I inevitably failed to meet those expectations, then pushing myself even harder to meet them, ignoring my needs and limits until I burned out yet again and then fell even further behind than before. It was never going to work. Realizing all this was simultaneously liberating and sad. It freed me from the self-flagellation I've been engaging in my whole life. It also forced me to realize and admit that my brain and body have limits and I've been exceeding them since preschool, and I need to slow down, way down. And that's a lot easier said than done. If you're autistic or neurodivergent in any way, at some point you'll need to implement some sort of energy budgeting system to manage your energy and prevent burnout. In Dr. Neff's workbook, she talks about spoon theory. So spoon theory is a system for managing the physical and mental energy required to perform daily tasks. It was coined by chronic illness writer and activist Christine Miserandino, and it's a metaphor for how people with chronic illnesses and/or disabilities have to ration our limited amounts of energy to ensure that we can keep up with the necessities of daily life. The theory goes that each spoon represents a unit of energy, and different tasks require a different number of spoons. For example, brushing your teeth at night might use up 1 spoon, and making small talk at the office might use up 5. Neurotypical people may have an unlimited supply of spoons, whereas an autistic person may only have 10 per day on a good day. This is what I mean when I talk about the limits of autistic brains and bodies. When you hit burnout, you've run out of spoons completely and you no longer have even just 1 to start the day with. You're running on empty, and this affects every single area of your life. The good news is that with spoon theory or any other kind of energy budgeting system, you can organize your spoon drawer into different categories to give yourself a visualization of how much energy you have to perform certain tasks. For example, you could break it up into executive functioning spoons, sensory spoons, social spoons, and physical energy spoons. You might have more spoons for executive functioning and less for socializing, or vice versa. You may have equal spoons for everything or no spoons for anything. The number of spoons you have for each category can vary from day to day, and if you get into the habit of checking in with yourself every day to see how many spoons you have, you can organize your day accordingly. This gives you a sense of agency and control over your life, because when you're in burnout, it can so often feel like you have no control at all. And it allows you to understand and communicate better with those around you about your energy rhythms. In her workbook, Dr. Neff says, embracing the ebb and flow of your neurodivergent energy is an act of self-compassion, honoring your natural rhythms and guiding you toward greater alignment and balance. Part of coming to terms with burnout and starting the process of recovering from it means acknowledging that your brain and body have limits, and then finding ways to honor and work within those limits if you can. Everyone's brains and bodies have limits, whether you're autistic or not, but those limits just happen to come up a lot faster and harder in autistic people. This means that to avoid burnout in the future and some of its scarier manifestations, it's important to honor those limits and try to not push past them as much as you can. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done, and it first requires a process of grieving all the things you thought you could do. I'm currently coming to terms with the fact that I can't work outside the house and have a social life. It burns through my supply of spoons very fast, and at the end of the day, I don't even have the energy to answer a text message most of the time, let alone go out for dinner with a friend or have a phone call to catch up with someone or go see a movie. Throughout my life, I've lost many friends over this because I didn't know A, what was going on, B, how to communicate about it, and C, how to ask for what I needed. So I would just let that text message sit in my inbox or let that phone call go unanswered for days, weeks, even months sometimes. I berated myself for not being able to respond, and the more time that went by, the more shame I felt about it, and the more shame I felt about it, the harder it became to respond. I would finally give up and admit that I had just ghosted yet another friend. What's wrong with me? Why am I such a terrible person? I wish that I had known back then that autism and burnout were the reasons behind my lack of energy or desire for social contact, and that I would either have to find friends who were also autistic and have similar energy levels, or admit that I can't have friends and do life things at the same time because that would pile too many demands on my nervous system. If you're autistic, there's a good chance that you simply will not be able to do the same amount or kinds of things as neurotypical people, and that's okay. Part of going through burnout, especially the first burnout after you're diagnosed or realized you're autistic, is coming to terms with what your limits are and grieving the things you thought you'd be able to do, as well as the life you thought you were going to have. That means setting realistic and achievable goals for yourself that are different from what society wants from you while working on any people-pleasing behaviors, because people-pleasing is a huge factor in burnout. You'll realize that this is why you hate people. Autism and misanthropy go together like butter and popcorn. This is because dealing with other people is one of the most exhausting parts of autistic existence and a major contributing factor to burnout. Being around other people is simultaneously draining and overstimulating. Other people chew loudly, talk loudly, smell weird. You're always hyper aware that they're in your vicinity, and there are all these incomprehensible, unwritten social rules that you're expected to just know. That's a lot for an autistic brain to process, on top of having to think about what to say and whether we're conforming to the social norms that we do know about. There is also the element of people-pleasing, which a lot of us engage in as a survival mechanism to help mask our autism, especially if you're a woman or were assigned female at birth. Women and AFAB people are socialized to be overly conciliatory and polite, which is one of the many reasons why so many autistic women and AFAB people are undiagnosed or don't get diagnosed until later in life. The pressure to conform to social expectations of femininity are relentless, and it's difficult for everyone, not just autistic people. But when you're on the spectrum, you're keenly aware of just how much you don't naturally conform to these social expectations most of the time. Becoming perpetual people pleasers is one way that many autistic people, especially autistic women, learn to adapt to our social communication differences. It's why we mask, to help others feel more comfortable around us and to reduce that uncanny valley feeling we can sometimes unknowingly invoke in non-autistic people. Masking and people-pleasing are coping strategies that allow us to navigate social situations more easily and avoid misunderstandings and potential conflict. While it might be an effective strategy when we're kids, people-pleasing behavior and poor boundaries ultimately aren't healthy coping mechanisms for anyone, whether you're autistic or not. For autistic people in particular, there are major contributing factors to burnout. I've recently noticed that a reliable sign of impending burnout for me is that I develop an extreme aversion to other people. If things have been piling up, I might suddenly wake up one day and hate everyone. People suddenly look ugly and off-putting to me, and I can't find anything beautiful in anyone unless I literally love them beyond all comprehension. I even start to hate music unless it's purely instrumental, because that's how much I can't stand the sound of other people's voices. This sudden misanthropy feels like when you eat too much chocolate at once, and then just the thought of chocolate makes you want to throw up for a while afterwards. That's because there's usually a sign that there's been too much peopling, i.e. people pleasing, going on, and our nervous systems are trying to protect us by making us temporarily allergic to other humans until we've had a chance to recover. In her blog, Neurodivergent Insights, Dr. Neff lists a few ways in which people pleasing can contribute to autistic burnout. Social and communication demands. Trying to please others involves a lot of social interaction and communication, which can be draining and overwhelming. Add on top of that the effort it takes to navigate non-autistic social norms in the first place, and you have a recipe for burnout. Loss of personal autonomy. If people-pleasing becomes a priority, it can be easy to lose sight of your own needs and desires, which leads to a lack of personal autonomy and a feeling of being lost and adrift at the whims of others. This can be frustrating and demotivating and can lead us to resent other people. Cognitive overload. A big part of people-pleasing involves trying to anticipate the needs and desires of other people, which can be very mentally and emotionally demanding. This can lead to a state of overload and exhaustion as a result of having to process too much information at once. Just like job burnout is caused by overextending yourself at work with very little reward or sense of accomplishment in return, misanthropy during autistic burnout is caused by too much people-pleasing without any reward to our brains. It's no wonder we develop an aversion to other people when we're burned out. Other people are a big factor in causing burnout in the first place. Autistic brains are wired differently, and we generally don't experience positive social feedback as being rewarding, even at the best of times. We tend to be more motivated by facts and ideas, especially those related to our special interests, rather than people. So when we're masking and pretending to be interested in other people or engaging in small talk to make others comfortable, we end up burning ourselves out in much the same way anyone would at a draining dead-end job that they hate and yet have to work in order to pay the bills. While people-pleasing might seem like a helpful survival strategy even if you're not autistic, it's not healthy or sustainable for anyone, and it can be especially draining and exhausting for autistic people. Experiencing an extreme aversion to other people during burnout is normal, and it's a signal from your nervous system that you've been spending too much energy on trying to please other people, and all your social spoons are dirty and gross and crusty now, so of course you're put off by them. If you can, the best thing to do is limit social time and avoid crowded places until you start to refill that spoon drawer. But in order to do that, you have to set good boundaries, and that's hard. It will require you to come face to face with all the negative, shaming messages you've received from society, and you'll realize that you have to confront your internalized ableism. This is a big topic that honestly deserves its own video, and I've been wanting to make that video for a while now, but burnout. I've been working with my therapist for the past 8 or 9 months now to confront my internalized ableism, but it's a process and I've only made very little progress. I've come to realize that my internalized ableism affects every area of my life and is at the heart of a lot of my insecurities. I have imposter syndrome at work because I'm scared that my neurodivergence makes me a bad employee, and I live in constant terror that my partner will fall in love with someone else who's way more fun and flexible and spontaneous and who isn't a boring and too sensitive and easily triggered autistic person. I push myself to keep going when I'm exhausted because I don't want to be perceived as being lazy or incompetent. I second guess my diagnoses all the time, and I wonder if I don't actually have ADHD or autism and it was all a big mistake and maybe I'm just lazy and a drain on society. I'm intimidated by my neurotypical peers because I perceive them as being inherently better than me. I have a constant, ever-present urge to be useful to others because otherwise I would have no inherent worth or value outside of what I can produce and contribute, which a lot of the time is not much. All of this is internalized ableism, and it makes me feel like I'm not worthy of taking up space or asking for what I need. This obviously makes it hard to set and maintain good boundaries, which is a very important thing to do when you're trying to recover from burnout, as it turns out. One way that internalized ableism shows up for a lot of neurodivergent people is when we fall for the overwhelming temptation to hold ourselves to neurotypical standards and expect ourselves to perform accordingly. This can cause us to push past our limits and ignore our need for rest. This might come up with thoughts like, I just need to push through. This is simple. It shouldn't be so hard. My friend can do this, so I should be able to do this. I just rested yesterday, so it's okay to push myself today. These thoughts are a reflection of the negative and harmful ways our society views and shames people with disabilities, and we end up internalizing it. This makes it really hard to set boundaries and ask for support when we need it. But of course, when we don't do these things, we're only going to end up falling even further behind, which will fuel the vicious cycle of internalized ableism and shred our self-worth even more. When I realized I was in burnout and that I had to start setting boundaries and asking for what I needed, I was surprised at how difficult it was to do those things. I felt like I didn't deserve accommodations because I hadn't earned them, and that by asking for the things I needed to be able to function better, I was being too needy or sensitive or weak. I felt like I should just be able to keep going, even though I was struggling with urges to self-harm and a deep desire to just go to sleep and never wake up. I felt like I didn't deserve help, and that by asking for it, I would be taking up too much space. One of the things I struggled with was knowing that I needed to talk to someone urgently, especially with regards to like my feelings of ideation and like wanting to self-harm. So I had a lot of misgivings about like calling a hotline because I didn't feel like my case was severe enough to warrant help, and that I didn't want to take up time and energy that could be spent towards somebody who like really was in immediate crisis and needed that help. I ended up reaching out to a hotline a couple of times because I made a promise to my partner when we got married that I would look after myself no matter what. And so in that moment, part of looking after myself and part of honoring that promise to her meant that I had to get help that I needed, and my therapist wasn't available for an emergency session. So I had to call a hotline a couple of times, and I'm really glad that I did that in retrospect, because it just sort of like gave me the pause that I needed to take a few deep breaths and sort of get a little bit of ground back underneath me and realize that like my situation is temporary. It will pass. Things will get better. I just have to kind of not push myself and just do what I can. And I can only do what I can. And the people that I spoke to on the hotlines reminded me of that. And I'm very grateful that they were there, because I don't think I was capable of reminding myself of that in that moment. So all of that to say, if you are struggling with those thoughts, you're not alone. It's okay. And that's why hotlines exist. And you are not taking up too much space by asking for help when you need it, even if help is just in the form of somebody to listen who knows what is going on and has been there before and will not shame you for all of the things that you're shaming yourself about. So all of that to say, I will include some phone numbers for hotlines and places you can call in the description down below. So please do make use of those resources, especially if you're in Canada, if you need them. That's why they're there. But anyways, I digress. If you're serious about recovering from burnout, eventually you will have to confront your internalized ableism. And when you do, it may come as a surprise just how much you've absorbed and accepted our society's ableist attitudes and expectations. You may realize how much you've been unconsciously hiding your autistic needs and traits, believing that they'll make you appear weird or inferior to non-autistic people. You will, in a sense, start to realize how much you've been repressing and oppressing yourself, shaming yourself preemptively by forcing yourself to fit into society's expectations, which in and of itself is a major cause of burnout. This is a hard thing to come to terms with, and honestly, I don't have a lot of answers or advice other than please do take whatever help is available to you, because this is something that I'm working on right now with my therapist. So I feel like I'm not qualified to really talk about it other than this is my experience and you're not alone. But confronting and challenging our internalized ableism is a crucial step in recovering from burnout and, more importantly, ultimately accepting our full autistic selves just as we are. You'll realize that you may or may not recover, but either way, your life needs to look different now. If you're a late diagnosed autistic adult who decides you're going to try living up to neurotypical life standards, at some point, you have to come to terms with the fact that you're going to be living most of that life in a state of perpetual burnout. There's nothing wrong with making that choice. It is a perfectly valid and understandable choice to try to keep up with neurotypical society. But But just be aware that if that's a choice you're making, you are also making the choice to be in a state of perpetual burnout, and you will need help. Our autistic brains and bodies simply do not have the energy to sustain that level of effort and masking without severe consequences for our health, happiness, and well-being. If they did, we wouldn't be autistic. When you burn out badly enough that you start to experience skills loss and can't function or look after yourself anymore, something has to change. And that often involves making hard choices. Quitting your job if you can do so responsibly, or finding a new job if you can't, limiting your social time, getting out of that relationship that's been adding to your stress and overwhelm, letting yourself skip a week or two of house cleaning and chores, whatever you have to do to allow yourself time to rest and recover, that's what needs to be done. Some of us may never recover from burnout at all if it's bad enough. I don't say that to scare you, only to nudge you to think more seriously about ways that you can reduce demands and stress so that you can function in a more sustainable way even when you're out of spoons. If you are diagnosed at level 1, you may find that your support needs go up drastically during burnout to the point where your autism may look and feel more like level 2 or level 3. It's okay to ask for help and accommodations, and that's where confronting your internalized ableism becomes really, really important, like I touched on earlier. It's not always possible to reduce demands from others, especially if you have kids or a job that requires a lot of emotional, physical, and/or mental labor. But you can reduce your own demands on yourself. Giving yourself permission to drop any perfectionist tendencies and doing work that's just good enough, or allowing yourself to just do the bare necessities, are accommodations that you can give yourself in order to turn down the faucet of demands and expand your bucket at the same time, to borrow language from Dr. Megan Anna Neff. You can't always access accommodations from others because there's unfortunately still a lot of bias and misinformation out there about autism and autistic adults. Which is stupid because, as I mentioned already, we accommodate neurotypical people all the time by masking for their benefit and striving to meet their standards, even though it leads to burnout and severe mental health consequences for us. Accessing accommodations is also easier if you're white, cisgender, heterosexual, relatively wealthy, over the age of 50, and a man. If you're in a position of relative privilege, you're less likely to be perceived as lazy, disruptive, hysterical, picky, too sensitive, or whiny. You can hire a cleaner to clean your house, an assistant to take over the tasks that require good executive functioning skills, and a babysitter to watch your kids. You're more likely to have a job with generous benefits, time off, and a flexible work schedule. It's easier to access good healthcare, specialized therapy, and support groups. You can literally buy yourself the time and space you need to recover. If you're poor, have multiple disabilities, are queer, are a person of color, an Indigenous person, an immigrant, a woman, an AFAB person, or anyone really who's younger than 40, it can be harder to access accommodations or support because of cultural biases against young people, non-white people, poor people, and queer people. If it's not safe or realistic to ask for accommodations, there are still some things you can do to self-accommodate so that you can recover from burnout faster and blunt the worst of its effects for next time. Routines and rituals. Routines and rituals are important to many of us on the spectrum because they help us regulate and control what happens to us, at least to some degree. I've been told so many times in my life by well-meaning teachers, therapists, and loved ones that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control your reaction to it. And that statement always felt so invalidating and insensitive to me. When you're experiencing autistic burnout, you actually can't control your reactions to things, or at least you can't control them as well as you might be able to otherwise. That's why meltdowns and shutdowns happen. It's never okay to be an asshole or to hurt someone, but if we're just having an intense but harmless meltdown, it's not really something that's within our ability to control. If it was, it wouldn't be happening. When someone says you can't control what happens, but you can control your reaction to it, what autistic people hear is you can't control what happens, but you can mask your reaction to it so that other people feel more comfortable with your discomfort. This ends up feeling less like well-meaning advice and more like yet another demand. We have a hard time controlling our reactions to things at the best of times, but during burnout, it becomes nearly impossible because we're so much more exhausted and sensitive. Being extra vigilant about our routines is a way for us to control what happens to us so that we can control our reactions to it, so that we can regulate and self-soothe more easily, so that we can maintain some level of functioning, so that we can continue to show up for the rest of our lives. That's why it becomes really important to maintain as much of our routines as we can during periods of burnout, especially if they tend to last a long time. If you have an autistic person in your life and you notice they're being a lot more rigid about their routines all of a sudden, as long as it's not actively harming you or them, just let them do it. it because they're likely just trying to self-soothe and regain some sense of control over what happens to them. And maybe ask if they're okay and would they like a little bit of extra support. Be mindful of sensory input. In the Burnout Workbook, Dr. Neff includes an exercise to help you identify your sensory profile, i.e. what sensory input feels good to you and what contributes to meltdowns and exacerbates burnout. It's definitely worth picking up a copy of the workbook and doing the exercises to figure out what your sensory triggers are in both directions. Autistic people can have trouble with interoception, which is a fancy word for the ability to feel and know what signals our bodies are sending to us. Often we don't feel hungry until we're starving, or tired until we're literally falling asleep, or like we have to pee until it's literally an emergency. This also means that we unfortunately don't always know when we're overwhelmed by sensory input either, or when we need more of a certain kind of sensory input like deep pressure or light touch. Knowing what your sensory triggers are goes a long way towards mitigating some of the side effects of burnout. When you're already in it, some of those triggers will become more obvious as you become more sensitive to sensory input. Knowledge is power, so if you know that background noise or bright lights or certain temperatures or textures are likely to trigger a meltdown, then you can self-accommodate to reduce those triggers. When I'm experiencing burnout, I become a lot less tolerant of background noises, overhead lights, any kind of music, unless it's instrumental, spicy foods, cold temperatures, clutter, bright colors, lots of stuff around me, and just other humans in general. My morning commute becomes unbearable, and I experience a lot more irritation and even rage when my sensory stuff is triggered. Things like noise-canceling headphones or earbuds, eye masks, sitting in the same seat on the same train car every day, making my bed every morning, picking out cute outfits that I'm excited to wear on office days, eating safe foods that I know I love, and listening to nature sounds all help me reduce unwanted sensory input and maximize the sensory input I do crave. If I'm feeling very dysregulated, I treat myself like I have the flu and take a sick day or work from home and just let myself rest in a dark and silent room. Reduce demands. This one is harder, especially if you're not in a position of relative privilege, as I talked about earlier. Unfortunately, as adults, we have responsibilities that we can't just ignore or let go of without major consequences. Reducing demands isn't about telling everyone and everything to go to hell and leave us alone, as tempting as that might be. It's about seriously evaluating what's sustainable and what isn't. Does your kid need to go to extracurricular activities and lessons every night of the week, or can they just pick one activity that they really love? Do you really need to turn in that assignment early, or can you give yourself the full time to work on it and turn it in at the last second on the day it's due? Do you have to go above and beyond on that work project, or is it okay to just do exactly what's asked of you and no more? Do you really have to go to that bachelorette party or anniversary party or birthday party, or can you just send some flowers and a card expressing your well wishes and apologies for not being able to be there? Reducing demands also means reducing the demands we place on ourselves, i.e. confronting our internalized ableism. It can even be as simple as reminding ourselves as soon as we get home that we don't have to unpack our bags and wash our lunch containers right away, and it's okay to just drop everything as soon as we walk through the door, take a few deep breaths, remind ourselves that we're safe now, and focus on landing softly instead of doing all the things. I'm learning to be okay with the bare minimum because in burnout, you have to go into survival mode a little bit, just like your phone goes into power save mode when it's running low on battery and you're not anywhere near a charger. Spending time alone. Alone time is vital when you're recovering from burnout. This is another way in which autistic burnout differs from depression, because when you're depressed, part of treatment is to spend time with other people and resist the temptation to isolate. When you're experiencing autistic burnout, however, the opposite is true. Spending time alone in a room allows you to unmask and be your full autistic self. You can stim, watch your favorite comfort shows and movies, have a comfort object close by. You can move and position your body in ways that feel good and natural to you, but may not be broadly socially acceptable, like sitting on the floor, for example. And there isn't that pressure to engage in conversation or small talk. Spending time with supportive loved ones and/or other autistic people where you can unmask without judgment, misunderstandings, or awkwardness can also be helpful when you're experiencing burnout. We tend to stick together, so it's likely that you already have at least one autistic friend, and if not, there are lots of support groups you can join if you feel so inclined. But before doing that, it's crucial to have a period of rest where you can slowly get your body and brain back into a state of regulation, and from there, gradually gain back some energy. Rest. The problem with a lot of burnout recovery steps is that they require energy you just don't have at first, which is why it's important to allow yourself some time to rest before trying to do too much. Rest doesn't have to mean treating yourself like you're sick and staying in bed all day, although it can mean that, at least at first. Rest can also be unstructured play or engaging with a creative hobby, especially one that involves a lot of pattern recognition and repetition, like knitting or crochet, which autistic brains love, or sitting outside, or spending time with animals, or anything that calms down your nervous system and helps you complete the stress cycle. Completing the stress cycle is really important when you're feeling overwhelmed because it signals to your body that the stressful event is over and it can stop the fight or flight response. Our bodies and brains aren't built for chronic stress, so when we're constantly being dysregulated by a system that's actively hostile to our bodies and brains, we're in a constant state of stress. We all know the negative health impacts of chronic stress, even for people who aren't autistic. Having a constantly activated nervous system can lead to a whole host of health problems like depression, anxiety, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. When you're autistic, it's way more likely to lead to negative health outcomes sooner, which is one of the reasons that autistic people typically live 16 to 20 years less than neurotypical people. When your nervous system is activated, your body and brain think you're being attacked by a wild animal or that your life is in immediate danger in some way, so it floods your body with stress hormones that shut off all unnecessary bodily functions, ramp up your heartbeat and blood pressure, tense up your muscles, and prepare you to either run away or fight back. In order to even begin to relax, we first need to complete the stress cycle. This lets our bodies know that the danger has passed and it stops the stress hormones from flooding our systems. In order to complete the stress cycle, we need to release that energy by engaging in physical activity or laughing really hard or letting ourselves have a good cry. Then we can start to mindfully rest. Rest can be anything that gets you out of that fight or flight response and restores your energy. My favorite way to rest is by sitting on the floor with one of my American Girl dolls beside me and crocheting or sewing or embroidering while I listen to my favorite astrology podcasts and ignore all my messages and notifications. If I'm on the go and can't calm down that way, I have a paint by numbers coloring app on my phone that I find very soothing because it's mindful and not too stimulating, and it allows me to build small moments of creative rest into my day. If you're ADHD. This could be a whole video essay in and of itself, but if you're like me and you have both ADHD and autism, burnout and recovery are going to look a little bit different. ADHDers experience burnout too, and it's usually caused by too many commitments coupled with a lot of time pressures and not enough stimulation. For ADHDers, these factors can also contribute to and exacerbate autistic burnout. Burnout symptoms tend to be more intense and long-lasting for those of us with ADHD, and we're more likely to suffer from a loss of executive functioning skills during those times. Burnout recovery when you have both ADHD and autism involves all the steps I just talked about, coupled with the introduction of some element of novelty into your routine. When I'm in burnout, I can't stand anything novel in terms of the food I eat or my routines or a change of plans or, God forbid, spontaneous plans. But I do find that creative novelty helps me to actively rest and recover. Getting myself into a hyper-focused flow state with a new hobby or creative project, or playing with my clothes and figuring out cute outfits that I'm excited to wear and that bring a spark of joy to my commuting days, all help the ADHD part of my brain recover from burnout as well. Support. Finding the right support is crucial for recovering from burnout. This can be challenging because not all of us have access to good therapists who are specifically trained to work with autistic and neurodivergent patients. Experiencing burnout also requires us to find out what our own unique support needs are. All autistic people have support needs regardless of the level we're diagnosed at. Even though level 2 and level 3 autistic folks may have more overt support needs, level 1 autistic people have them too, and because of our challenges with interoception, we may not even know what they are until it becomes painfully obvious that we need them. I need a lot of support managing changes and transitions, and that's been true my whole life. But I only recently realized that's a support need, and it's actually okay to ask for support when confronted with changes, transitions, and disruptions to my daily routine. My partner helps me manage these things by giving me plenty of notice when there's a change coming up and giving me space to talk about and process my feelings and fears about it. They also help me with sensory soothing when I'm really overwhelmed through things like light touch, low lights, and silence. If you don't already have good support around you in the form of family, friends, coworkers, and partners, you can join a community group for adults with autism, read books and do workbooks like Dr. Megan Anna Neff's, or watch videos on YouTube like this one that can hopefully help you understand and be kind to your beautiful autistic brain. There are also a lot of things you can do to give yourself support during burnout, or even just a rough day when your brain is being extra spicy. Sitting on the floor with your back against a wall, if you're able to, gives you the feeling of being held and physically supported. Comfort objects like a favorite doll or stuffy can help you feel grounded and loved, especially during times when you feel alone or unsupported or misunderstood. I love taking a hot shower at the end of every day right before I crawl into bed to wash the day off my body and reset my energy and senses. During those hot showers, I always imagine the water literally washing the day off my skin and revealing my own authentic self underneath, free from the shell of other people's demands and expectations and energies. Going for a walk in nature, spending time with animals, even if it's just watching the birds outside your window, journaling, getting lost in a book, even just sitting in silence in a quiet, dark room. All of these things are ways that you can offer yourself support, honor your sensory needs, and separate yourself a little bit from all the chaos and insincerity and noise of the world that surrounds us and invades our brains all day, every day. So that's gonna do it for this one. I am completely exhausted now, so I'm gonna go lie down for a bit. But thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end. And if you're struggling with burnout right now, you're not alone. We live in trying times, and autistic or not, the past 5 years have taken a toll on everyone's mental health, and burnout is a thing that all of us have experienced at one time or another. So hopefully, even if you're not autistic, you have been able to find something helpful in this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I would love to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you can help out and help more people see these videos by subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment below and let me know if this video was helpful for you and if you'd like to see more like it. I hope you're all staying safe and well, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo.